This morning I came over from Newmarket, where my mother lives, and of course visiting family means revisiting memories, and particularly of my father, who passed away some 13 years ago now. And he and my mother flew out to Thailand in the cold season, and my father could hardly get up off the bed for a first day or two, which was unusual for him. We assumed that he had severe jet lag or a bit of a bad back. Took him to hospital in Bangkok, and he had an MRI scan, and the doctor discovered that he had fourth stage cancer in his spine. And of course the doctors were amazed that with the amount of pain that he must have been experiencing, that he could, or he volunteered to get on a plane and sit in a plane for 12 hours to come out to Thailand. Anyway, I had the job of going to inform my father of the results of the scan, and I told him, and he said, "Oh, fair enough. I got nothing to complain about. I've had a good life." And so he was, I think, for me, one of the best Buddhist, that's like Buddhist with a small b, if you can use Buddhist in that way, as we use Catholic with a small c sometimes, answer, because he wouldn't identify himself as a Buddhist, but if he'd have met Buddhism at the same age that I did, then I think he probably would have gone a long way. Anyway, there was no question of fighting cancer and doing all those things about cancer that you're supposed to do. He felt he'd had enough. Anyway, I wasn't intending to tell you about that, but I was wanted to tell you more about one personality trait he had, which is a familiar one, I think, for people of his generation. He was brought up to believe that it's a duty and a responsibility to keep up with the news, and he watched and listened to the news religiously. I can use that word, religiously. He wasn't a churchgoer, or he wasn't. He was somewhat cutting and critical of religion in most of its institutional forms, but he listened to the news religiously. And there was a period where I worked in his. He had a little engineering workshop, and I worked making the tea and doing various odd jobs, and we all had to have the news on every hour. It's just in case something had happened in the previous hour that we weren't up to speed on. And so this idea of there is this thing called news. There is a specific body of events occurring in the world which a responsible human being should know about, was his article of faith, we can say. And then over the years, coming back, first time I returned, 6 years had elapsed, and then subsequently coming every 2 years usually. And being able to see changes, snapshots of England and Western culture in almost like an anthropologist, I could say. And one of the things that I observed was the change in the news and the delivery of news. And I'm not talking about the profusion of news channels and all that's entailed, but content of news and the distinction between news and entertainment, which in my father's religion, as it were, was sacrosanct, has seemed to become very blurred. But still, I think we can say to this day that the news is sort of something to be considered news. It has to provoke strong emotions, which is why crime and sex and all these things will always figure largely in what is called the news. But then I was thinking and reflecting on this, as you probably have at some time or other, was who is it who decides what is the news? You know, in a country, in a continent, in a world, all of the things that happen in a day. And who is it who decides this is the news? This is something that everyone in the country or everyone in the world should know about. Who decides and on what criteria are those decisions made? And I think it's a truism to say that reading newspapers and listening to the news is very worrying and perhaps negative view of the world. But I thought, well, what is my news? You know, instead of taking the idea of news as determined by news organizations or people who are trying to make money out of selling information in one way or another, what's my news? And what's the news that I can personally verify? And my answer is, well, it's what's happening around me. And it's the people in my monastery or community, and what they're doing and what's happening to them. That's really the real news. And of course, that word, the real news, then we can't omit what's happening in our own body and mind. And that's probably the most important news of all. So I say my first observation about this is that the news, and although I'm a monk, it's a particular kind of group of people around me, I would say, and a community I live in of people who are committed to goodness and kindness. But I would maintain that for all of you, if we adopt this idea of news as being what's happening around us in our communities, there's a lot more good news than bad news. And the good news outweighs the bad news almost to the same degree that bad news outweighs good news in the newspapers and on television. And so I don't think that it's necessary at all to advocate some kind of positive thinking, look on the bright side of life kind of attitude to cheer us up, but simply to follow the Buddhist prescription to be observant, to wake up, to look at what's really happening rather than what you would like to happen or what you fear will happen, what you want to happen, but what's really going on. And what's really going on when we look around, when we open our eyes without prejudice, I think, and I see, is so much goodness, so much kindness. And I'm not talking, of course, about, extravagant and memorable acts of generosity and kindness, although we may be fortunate enough to experience those every now and again. I'm talking about everyday, mundane, small acts of generosity, politeness, kindness. And as a mindfulness practice, I think this is a marvelous and transformative meditation, one that we simply open our eyes to something that's already there. And this is a theme, of course, that we find throughout the Buddhist teachings, even at its most profound level of enlightenment experiences, where often the enlightened monk, the enlightened nun, the enlightened meditator doesn't exclaim that she's discovered some new continent, some new dimension of being, but simply recognizes or has a new, fresh experience of something that was right before their eyes all along. And so that willingness to put down preconceptions, and as I say, not say, I've got to look on the bright side, I've got to be positive, don't take on all this negativity around you. I don't think that's a very wise or successful strategy. But when the harshness and the cruelty and the insensitivity and selfishness is seen as it is within the context of the news, the whole news about what's going on in our world, not in the world or the world that we can look up on a Google app, but the world of our experience, what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste, this direct world, and coming back to that again and again, reestablishing our attention in what's really going on right now. And that there's a purification in that, simply in that willingness to apply the mind to observing, to waking up to what's already here. But this is not necessarily and is not at all a passive or merely a practice of simple observation. There is action arising from observation, but the character of that action is that it is timely action. Often the very simple, straightforward teachings that we can perhaps be a little bit heedless of and not give them the attention and respect they deserve, such as do good, get good result, do bad, get bad results. It's like ABC, nursery level Buddhism, but it's also doctor level or postdoctorate level Buddhism, and it's something that we don't fully appreciate, I think, because we're not looking closely enough, we're not observing, we never taught ourselves how to observe these things. But also because we don't really give enough time to consider what a good action is, what a good result is, and what a bad action is, what a bad result might mean in short term and long term. But also, I think that when we start to look and to observe our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and the things that go on more and more, we can see that, to use a familiar phrase from Western cultures, there's a time and a place for everything. And so often we put undue emphasis, too much emphasis on a good heart, and think that we have a good heart, then everything else will just follow. If you just love, be kind, then everything will work out. If you get married, as long as you love each other, everything will be fine in the long run. Well, I'm not sure that that's the case. And I think that if you want to help somebody, for instance, someone's in pain, someone's in some difficulty, and you want to help them, then sensitivity and awareness of when is the right time, where is the right place, the right environment to act, to speak in that compassionate, beneficial way, is absolutely fundamental to the success of your efforts. So many people want to help, but they don't really, I think, give enough thought, care to what is the best way to help, how to help, or how to create the conditions in which that person can receive your help. So lacking a certain wisdom and a sense of timeliness, right time and place, which is something you can't learn from a book, it comes through mindfulness and wakefulness and observation. Lacking that, when we act well but act prematurely, then often we are frustrated and disappointed with the results and conclude that, we did a good thing and we didn't get a good result. So this observation and steady, consistent, calm observation doesn't mean that we just turn into like an armchair observer of life, but it gives us a much more refined and reliable guide to when is the most effective time to act, when is it better not to act, when is the time to speak, when is it better not to speak. But the skill in gathering together all supportive conditions to assist in our acts of goodness and kindness is a life skill which does not come simply and easily for most of us, but it is a skill which can be acquired and cultivated. I was speaking with the nuns this morning and relating an anecdote regarding Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Sumedho. And more than 20 years ago, I was given the task by the Sangha at Wat Bapong to write the official biography of Ajahn Chah to be printed in his funeral, as a funeral volume, which was, as you can imagine, a challenge on so many different levels. One, that my confidence in my Thai prose style was not so great at that time. But anyway, over a period of some months, even years, of gathering information and interviewing monks, nuns, lay people, family members, in preparation to the writing of this volume, I interviewed Luang Por Sumedho. And one of the things he said was that things that impressed him about Luang Por Chah, Ajahn Chah, was that he was able to create an environment or a situation that taught you or gave you the opportunity to learn. And I remember this particularly because at the time that he said it, I felt somehow it was slightly disrespectful. I wasn't giving Ajahn Chah the full credit for his remarkable powers as a teacher or someone who can change people's lives. But then over the course of time, through my own training and training others and observing, I began to agree with Luang Por Sumedho that this, in many ways, was the genius of Luang Por Chah, in that he created an environment, a system of training, which created the optimum supportive conditions for transformation, for the abandonment of the unwholesome, the development of the wholesome, and the purification of the mind. And that's no small thing at all. And that kind of subtlety and recognition of what conditions can be created or cultivated or tweaked in order to have the maximum or optimum beneficial effect on others is, I think, one thing that's really worthy of study. I was recently on a teaching tour in China. And of course, China historically, Mahayana Buddhist culture. And although, as you know, Chinese Buddhism has suffered its ups and downs, let's say, over the past century, particularly a time of cultural revolution, of course. Just as in Thailand, irrespective of whether people go to monasteries or not, meditate or not, these kind of Buddhist values permeate the society, the kindness, the tolerance, and generosity, and so on, which everyone observes and comments upon. But in China, there is this admiration and praise of anyone who makes sacrifices for others, who puts other people's welfare before their own. That's to me, a very noticeable, beautiful trait that I've seen in many Chinese people. And so, in inevitable discussions about the differences, similarities between Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, or so-called Hinayana Buddhism, my understanding of this and what I was sharing with people is that it's not that Theravada Buddhists overlook or in any way disparage helping other people. Far from it. In fact, I think you could say in many Asian societies, you could say there's a Mahayana spirit, if we use that phrase in its original meaning. But in Theravadan understanding, we don't feel it's wise to make a distinction between helping self and helping others, one's own happiness and the happiness of others, one's own welfare and the welfare of others. We see those things as being inseparable. And indeed, if we overlook and neglect the importance of working towards our own happiness and our own welfare, then our ability, our skill, our powers to help others in the long term are severely impaired or limited. And I'm sure all of you know people with such very high-minded and very pure-minded, and people who want to do good for society, do good for the world, do something to make this world a better place, and throw themselves into volunteer work of one kind or another, and then a year or two down the road, completely burnt out and have to withdraw. And so long term, maybe 2-3 years of feverish, pure-hearted endeavor. I'm unable to sustain that admirable commitment to the welfare of sentient beings. Whereas as in a Theravada tradition, as I understand it, we're talking, how can I approach this commitment to the welfare of sentient beings in such a way that it's sustainable, given my own limitations? So how can I think about a consistent, steady, compassionate effort for 30 years or 40 years or 50 years? What are the conditions that would need to be fulfilled to make that realistic? Something like I think, yes, I could do that. And I think the conclusion that we may arrive as, I need some time, personal time for physical relaxation, time with family, and time for meditation and for inner quiet and stillness as a balance to activity. Because no matter how wholesome activity and beneficial activity, maybe it's still activity. And some of you may be familiar with one of the discourses in the Majjhima Nikaya, in which the Buddha recounts that prior to his enlightenment, he examined his mind and divided mental states into 2 camps, the wholesome and the unwholesome camp. And he was able to train his mind to the extent that for hours on end, day and night, he could sustain completely wholesome ideas, thoughts, mental states without any intrusion of the unwholesome. But he concludes, but at the end, he realized that even though every single thought, every single reflection was pure and wholesome, it was still activity, and it was tiring, and it prevented his mind from going to the next level of profundity. And so he realized that at this stage of his development, he needed to, at that time, put down even the wholesome thoughts. And I think that as a lesson for all of us on a much more mundane level is that even goodness and kindness and kind activities, they are tiring to a certain degree, and that we need to make time in our life for nothing, for no thought, for silence, and we're communicating with others, but often we're lacking this communication with ourselves, with our own heart and mind. And sometimes it's easy to take this kind of result-oriented mind states into meditation and to judge ourselves on whether we're good meditators or not by the degree to which we experience the kind of mental states we think signify success. So a lot of people say, I'm not a very good meditator, I never had this peace, and I never had any kind of nimittas and visions and colours and all this kind of stuff. Everyone else has it. I know I've never had any of that at all. I'm hopeless. But that's, of course, really not the point. And it's that commitment to effort and to becoming awake, or trying to re-establish one's commitment to wakefulness, an awakened mind. And often there are some very beneficial effects of meditation that we may not credit as being particularly important because they're not what we think we should be getting from meditation. One of them is those little thoughts that pop up into the mind. Maybe something is we're meditating and then there's a distraction. Yes, definitely a distraction, but at the same time, that thought has some value. It's the thought that this is really getting out of hand. I've allowed this to go way beyond what I intended, or I'm way off track here. So there's these thoughts that are popping up, which are thoughts that have been floating around in our unconscious or subconscious or wherever things float, and which our busyness has prevented us from making conscious. So it's so many times, it's not that we need some new answers from some wise person or wise book. It's more allowing the mind to settle down and to allow those answers and thoughts to bubble up into consciousness. Sometimes we suddenly realize that some small, insignificant habit has become quite a serious addiction or difficulty in our life. And at the same time, maybe something that's been a real worry and a concern for quite some time. In the course of a meditation, there may be this realization, this thought come out, that's really nothing at all. It's just nothing to make a fuss about. Now, in everyday life, we may even have said that to ourselves or others, or someone else has said to us. You say, look, you really need to let this go. Look, it's really not so serious as, yes, I understand. Or you really need to be careful with this. You know, you're getting into some pretty dangerous areas with this. You know, yes, I know. And yes, we know, but we don't feel it, do we? And the value of meditation, even in this stage where you're still struggling with sustaining mindfulness on an object, is as the mind calms down, then a lot of these answers, a lot of these insights, a lot of these fears, anxieties even, that we've been holding down without realizing it, are able to appear without overwhelming us. And this also, observing again, we can observe that we can allow ourselves to be conscious of things, and we have the emotional maturity and strength to let go of them when we feel safe. That feeling of safety is so important. This is why one of the reasons why we have monasteries. And a monastery is the most safe place. You should feel in a monastery, this is the safest place you've ever been. Now, as a monk, this is one of the wonderful luxuries, you can say, about being a monk, that it's not visible to a visitor. But if you're a monk, you can put something down. Maybe it's something of some value. I put it there, and I know. I just don't even have to think about it, that even if this was incredibly valuable, say this is the sort of the elixir of something or other, you have any kind of wound, you tip on it, and you get better. You've got cancer, you just take that much and it disappears. It's the most incredible thing. But you put this down, and even something as wonderful, incredible, as unique as this, that nobody would even think about taking it. 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, you go back and it'll be exactly where you put it, because you live with people who don't take what's not given. And the sense of trust and security and safety and warmth and friendliness that comes through living in communities of people who keep precepts is a wonderful thing in itself. but it also means that you're able to look at difficult things within yourself. You feel safe enough to open up and to be able to look at and to learn from things within yourself that in a less safe environment you might not. So keeping precepts is absolutely critical to any success in meditation. What I mean is success is keeping at it, doing it, enjoying it, and learning from it, not attaining it. Or the real success of meditation is you don't stop, you keep doing it. If you're still doing it and you're still putting your best effort into, that's success. But at the same time, there are all kinds of benefits that should observe, notice. This is the news. Like if you meditate last thing at night, that's okay. I mean, it's good to do that. You're relaxed, you get a good sleep. But when you wake up in the morning, it's like a new chapter of your life. And as you go about your daily activities, it's very difficult, I think, to draw any conclusions or to say to yourself, "Oh, I'm really glad I meditated last night because I feel so much more mindful this morning." And so that kind of reinforcement of your commitment to meditation practice and this awakening is lacking. Also, if you meditate last thing at night, often it just becomes like a ritual, and you're not really putting your heart into it. It just becomes like a relaxation technique rather than an awakening process. And relaxation techniques are good and fine, better than taking a pill. But if you meditate first thing in the morning, you wake up, you're rested, not so much going on in your mind. And if you put some effort into it, then you come out of the meditation, observe. What is anything change? What happened? Do you find yourself a little bit more patient, a little bit more present, a little bit more centered, a little bit kinder? Do you know these incremental changes? Not like big sort of wow kind of experiences, but just this small incremental gains of quality of life, of well-being. And the more you have this sense of well-being, then the more you want to share it with others. That's just a natural result. So learning and observing, this is not a religion of dogmas. It's not a religion of me, the monk, sitting on the seat, has all the answers, and you sitting down there, you have all the questions, and I'm going to tell everything, I'm going to fix you. As a role as a monk, particularly, is to encourage you to ask good questions about your life, and to observe and learn from your experience, because that's when it really sinks in. That's when it becomes real to you. When you see, yes, it's right. I can see that. I can see that in myself. I can see that around me. I can see when I act in this way, when I speak in this way, it has that kind of result. When I act in that way, and yes. And so you build up, to use a computer analogy, you develop this whole kind of database, sort of mass of information over time about the effects of actions and speech on mental states, on health, and so on, and it results in a very natural and spontaneous wisdom in how you live your life. Learning all the time, learning, not gaining, not getting something, not competing with anyone, but learning through listening, learning through observation, this body, this mind, this situation, these people I'm with. And it's a wonderful thing. And I think it's when we realize how wonderful this practice, how wonderful these teachings are, then I don't think that we can fail to feel an immense gratitude to our teachers and our lineage. And gratitude is not something you should have. Sometimes this is the mistake I feel in Asian cultures like Thailand. You're told, you should be grateful. A good person is a grateful person. But that's fine. But for me, gratitude is an expression of wisdom. The more you wake up, the more you observe, the more you realize just how much you received from your parents, your teachers, those around you. How could you not be grateful? For me, ingratitude is a sign of stupidity, basically, as a very dull person who's not grateful. Someone who says, I'm a self-made man or a self-made woman, I immediately think, yeah, really? Is that possible? But the more that we look, and the more that we see, the more grateful we can feel. So we're sitting in this Dhamma hall. Just what's gone into it. How many people have put effort into this Dhamma hall, into the fundraising, the funds that provided, all the craftsmen, the workers, the monks, the nuns, and just how many lives and how much goodness and sincerity has gone into creating this situation which we are, and this room and this hall that we are all enjoying right now. So when you get down, and sometimes we all get a little bit, lose a bit of inspiration, get a little bit depressed, a little bit, don't take a pill, don't try and force yourself out of it and cheer yourself up and look on the bright side of life. Just open your eyes, look around you, what's really going on. Learn about the news, make following the news a religious pursuit. So I would like to end my discourse at this point. Thank you. So we're going to have a chat, discussion period, questions, answers. You can criticize anything I said or refute it, teach me something. If you feel comfortable to speak, then please speak up loudly or take the microphone. If you have some paper and pencil and you want to write something down and send it, I can do that as well. Otherwise, I'll just go back to my mum's house.
Hello, is that okay? I've always thought for a long time now. I've always thought that the very kind of westernized, secularized form of meditation, which has obviously become mindfulness, the mindfulness that we know now, it's been around for a long time. I've thought for a very long time that not necessarily my fear or my concern, well, yeah, I guess a fear and a concern, really, of that form of mindfulness was that one day it would be proved in that Western model as simply not being good, because it's secularized and because it's been removed from the Noble Eightfold Path, and because there's not much, if any, emphasis ever being put on the morality or the ethics of that Noble Eightfold Path. I always thought that it would be kind of disposed of in a Western context and be proved to be just another fad, really. Mm. And I see now, after 10, 15 years or so, I see now that perhaps maybe that is starting to happen now. I've seen a little bit of gloss, a little bit of the veneer coming off of mindfulness. And I see that in one of the newspapers this weekend, I think there's been some research by Coventry University saying that research really should be looked at the medical benefits of mindfulness, because I think these researchers at Coventry have allegedly proved that it can actually induce anxiety, depression, and even psychosis.
Yeah.
And your comments on that, please.
Yes, timely question. Yeah, I think. Well, I'm just reminded of another trip I made to the West many years ago now, in the early 90s. And I went to a town in Massachusetts with a huge Cambodian refugee population. I can't remember the name of the town now, maybe somebody. It's like 20, 30,000 Cambodians there. And I wanted to visit the abbot of a monastery there, so very highly respected teacher and meditation teacher. And so I asked him, so many people traumatized by terrible events in Cambodia. How do you teach meditation to people who've been traumatized in this way? And he said, well, I don't teach them generosity and precepts. It's going to be quite some time before they're ready to meditate. And in the Asian tradition, where we have the whole Eightfold Path, meditation is not sort of plucked out of context and built up as a panacea, as an answer to all. Or it's seen as like the particular application of techniques, of mindfulness techniques. It's just like one string of your bow, if you like, and it may or may not be the particular area of cultivation of the Buddhist path that's most appropriate to an individual. My own experience, I think most senior monks, nuns would say, if someone comes to a monastery with severe mental problems or develops some kind of psychosis, the first thing you do is stop them meditating. You don't want people sitting with their eyes closed alone in a room. You want them out in the kitchen, gardening, cooking, doing things for others. So I think that we've sort of reified this kind of thing called meditation, and mindfulness. Every time come back, this mindfulness can do more and more good things for you. So I quite understand how there's this sort of growing skepticism and efforts to say, hold on, how you're pitching this as a sort of a secular, scientifically based phenomena. How good is the science? And then sometimes I think, because people have such good intentions and they're just so convinced that this is a good thing, that I think some of the science is sloppy and it's not so clear cut as some people would imagine. So, as in my talk just now, I'm saying how important ethics and precepts are for creating the conditions in which this kind of personal sort of transformation can take place in a healthy way and in a sustainable way. And I think that the mindfulness is also becoming absorbed in not just into the cultural milieu and absorbing this and sort of being sucked into all kinds of other areas, but it's also probably, as you know, becoming a business. There's a lot of money to be made from it now. And the moment there's money to be made, then inevitably there's a certain amount of corruption. And the mindfulness teacher courses, there's like I think it's like a 2-month course. It's like 16 hours or something like that over 2 months, and then within a short time you can be a qualified mindfulness teacher. Now, for any of us who know what like 16 hours of meditation is, that's not really giving you the tools to be a teacher. They have, of course, everything is, these mindfulness teachers have a very fixed plan. In day 1, day 2, day 3, the words, everything. So they're teaching from a script. And so I think that on a basic kind of relaxation level, it may well be quite a good thing. But it is very superficial. I'm speaking from someone who's just arrived, and so about a complex phenomena. So maybe I'm being unfair there, but that's the kind of my impressions. What I do know is that throughout Buddhist history, the role of the monastic order is, as the conservers and we're the ones who care for the tradition, look after it. And so there's always that kind of thing to come back to. Okay, the word mindfulness now has departed in certain ways from the way that the Buddha used it. And in fact, in a meeting we had of the Sangha last year, I put forth the view that I'm thinking more just to give up using mindfulness and just use the Pali sati. Because when we use mindfulness now, people have so many different ideas about what that might be, and I'm afraid that when I use mindfulness, I'm using it in one way and people are hearing it in another way. And that using the sati, the Pali word sati is a kind of a reminder that this is sati in Buddhist, Theravada Buddhist understanding of that term. So, I think this is why it's so important that you have this kind of conservative body of like the monastic order who just say, well, whether you we're not going to change things according to the needs or demands of society. It's sort of take it or leave it kind of teaching, and whether or not it's popular or not, this is our job, and or those of you who are associated with monasteries in a sort of formal kind of way, make some kind of commitment, and so. There's so many good things going on in that secular mindfulness movement, I think. And I think there are many people who will come to Buddhist teachings through them. But, it's an ongoing, I kind of debate to what extent we... in how exactly we relate to all these different offshoots of secular mindfulness, and what the sort of official, if you like, Buddhist response to that is. And I think Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Jayasaro are probably the ones to talk about that more than me, because I'm living in Thailand. Yes, anybody, any other question? Yeah. The Eightfold Path. Well, I'm going to expound it in a way that a practical way that I use in Thailand a lot. So, as you know, from the Eightfold Path, and these usually grouped. There's the group of three trainings of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Now, I think it's very important to recognize that this word samadhi in the threefold training does not have the same meaning as samadhi as the eighth factor in the Eightfold Path, meaning concentration, or there's the stability of mind. That in the threefold training, the word samadhi is like an umbrella term for all the different ways of educating the heart, the emotions, particularly in how we deal with defilements or negative emotions and kunatam or positive emotions. So in my work in Thailand, in finding ways of integrating the Eightfold Path or the Buddhist developmental process into education system, I found that the talking in terms of sila, samadhi, panya is very off-putting to most parents because their fear is, you just want to turn kids into monks and nuns, or preparing them for life in a monastery, which is not what I want for my good thing, but not what I want for. It's not the good thing that I want for my son or my daughter, which is, of course, not the idea anyway. So I, through my research and studies, I came across sutta in which the Buddha used another category or another way of talking about the Eightfold Path. And the word that he used there is the word pavana, which, again, sort of digress a little bit, there's no real word for meditation in the Pali language, as strange as it may seem. But this word pavana means cultivation. So rather than summarizing the Eightfold Path as the threefold training, the Buddha gives 4 kinds of cultivation or development. And these map onto the 3 trainings or the Eightfold Path. But I think in the practical terms, whether it's in a secular or sort of a normal education system or in daily life, this is a very useful way of looking at the Eightfold Path. So we talk about 4 areas of cultivation. One is the cultivation of the relationship between the human being and the material world. And the second is the relationship of the human being and the social world. So there's a division into 2 of sila. So we're talking about sila as our relationship with the material world and our relationship with the social world. And then the samadhi is the training of the heart, or the cultivation of the heart, and then panya is the cultivation of wisdom. So it's the same thing in slightly different terms, but I think because I use the word citta rather than samadhi, it makes it clear that it's cultivation of the heart rather than a specific kind of meditation practice. And the sila, then, it's getting away from the idea of it's like precepts, but it's in terms of how we live in the world and distinguishing between the material and the social side. So the material side would be the sila there, or the cultivation of the Eightfold Path, if you like, is in terms of how you treat your body, how you do, in terms of sleep, rest, exercise, food. How do you relate to your possessions? How do you relate to money? How do you relate to your house? How do you relate to technology? How do you relate to the environment? So all the different elements of your relationship to the material world. And then the social world is not simply 5 precepts, but it also includes things like developing good communication skills, developing social conscience, and helping others and doing good things in society for acts of generosity and kindness and so on, social service. And then the inner practices, 2 inner practices, cultivation of the heart. Now, of all the different meditation techniques, whether they're called samatha or vipassana, and this technique and that technique, I think they can all be explained or can be encompassed in terms of right effort, which is one of the elements of the Eightfold Path. So whatever meditation practice you're doing, you are firstly seeking to develop skills to prevent unwholesome mental states from arising in your mind. So you put your mind on a breath or on a mantra or on an idea or on a theme, and you're trying to prevent hindrances from arising in your mind. So you're developing this life skill of protecting the mind from unwholesome dhammas. Of course, you're not going to be successful with that, at least to begin with. So the second area that you're learning of skill and cultivation is how to deal skillfully with unwholesome mental states that have already arisen. The third thing you're trying to do in meditation is to create wholesome mental states, mindfulness, clear comprehension, all the bojjhangas, Dhamma Vijaya, Virya, Piti, Passapi, and so on. So we're seeking to prevent the arising of hindrances, abandon hindrances that have not yet arisen, creating the bojjhangas, and looking after the bojjhangas that have arisen and cultivating them further. So there's this fourfold effort, and we apply that in every area of life. But in meditation, then that's when we focus on these life skills in a very kind of artificial or a very focused way. So the meditation practice is a sort of training in right effort, if you like. And that whole area of finding skillful ways of dealing with unwholesome dhammas and skillful means of creating, sustaining, developing wholesome dhammas, this is the inner practice of the heart. And then wisdom, starting off from basic thinking skills, critical thinking, creative thinking, all these things have a part to play. But then going on from that to yoniso manasikara, which is the ability to reflect on experience. And there are two streams of yoniso manasikara. Okay, so one is where you are seeking to replace unwholesome dhammas with wholesome dhamma. So if your mind is full of sensual desire, it's just overwhelming, then you can reflect upon the unpleasant or unattractive elements of the sensual world as a replacement technique. And that's an example of yoniso manasikara, inclining the mind to think in like a train of thought, a train of reflection, which will replace an unwholesome train of reflection. So if you're feeling very lazy and low, maybe reflecting on death, feeling very agitated with sensuality, you can reflect on the unattractiveness. If you've got anger and negativity, you can develop a loving kindness reflections. So these are ways of thinking in a focused and concerted way, which will directly counteract or replace. So this is one thinking skill, wisdom skill. The second is the reflection directly on the way things are, the reflections on impermanence, on dukkha, on selflessness. And these discursive thinking approaches to the three characteristics are creating a familiarity with them and a fluency, which when the mind has been developed in samadhi will allow a kind of seamless movement into that non-verbal analysis of existence. So that's the highest level of the wisdom is this vipassana, or clear. So it's starting off basic, ordinary, everyday thinking skills, yoniso manasikara, and then to vipassana as the panya. So you have the development of action and speech in terms of cultivating wise relationship to the material world and the social world. You have work to deal with the negative emotions and cultivation of positive emotions. And then you have using thinking in constructive ways, leading ultimately to wisdom and vipassana level. It's the Eightfold Path as the four kinds of bhavana, or cultivation.
Hello, Bhante. I'm sorry, I'm not sure that this question is suitable to be asked. Recently, I've been told that, like through the news, that like, how should I phrase it, about certain conflicts that happen in Myanmar, and there was like cases where a majority tribe is discriminating a minority group, and the majority group happens to be mainly Buddhist population. So when I was scrolling my Facebook newsfeed, I've seen so many negative posts about criticism about the Buddhist group or certain monks. So and there are even people who take this opportunity to spread fake news, using fake photos, for example, the photos of earthquakes that happened in Tibet. That there are monks who helping in how should I in the burial ground. So so they were hate speech and saying that the monks are killing non-Buddhists, and so I'm quite concerned about this. So how should we react to this situation, being a Buddhist? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good and difficult question. I've always been, I can say, proud in a good way that Buddhism has no history of persecution of minorities, and I think that there are that's not accidental. I mean, the religions that grew up in the Middle East are religions based on dogmas, and there are, and when you have a religion based upon belief in dogmas, then you're built into that religion. You have a problem. How do you deal with people who don't believe in your dogmas? And what's your ethical responsibility towards them? If their only hope of going to heaven is to believe the things that you believe, then what's your responsibility? How far should you go to try to save them? So we see the whole spectrum from forced conversion through to using money and scholarships and all these things that we see throughout Asia, the ways for these religions try to spread and to grow. But because, and I think that in Thailand there's so many problems and difficulties, but in some ways it's an incredibly mature society. And one of the reasons why I would say that is, to give an example, there's not even a word for intolerance in Thai language. I mean, they kind of made one up recently, but so people can translate texts. But the idea that you should that you should persecute or that you should try to persuade people that have different beliefs than you do to share your beliefs or get out is completely alien to Thai society. And even these days, where there's been an insurgency in the south of Thailand, and bombs, and every day, I mean, it's underreported the amount of death and destruction that's going on down there. And yet, a Muslim could wear a hijab and walk anywhere in Thailand, and I could guarantee absolutely safe. It just wouldn't cross the mind of a Buddhist to persecute a Muslim in Bangkok or in Chiang Mai because there are Muslims in the south of Thailand blowing people up. And I think that's an incredible thing. And if you look in the history of Thailand, it's always been that way. And when the French hatched a plot in the 17th century to overturn and to put they converted one of the princes, and they had they were going to have a coup and put this Catholic prince on the throne and announced that Thailand was a Christian country, Catholic country, and the plot was foiled. But if you'd imagine if that were to happen in France or in any other way in the 17th century, what kind, and almost zero reprisals or it's quite marvelous. And I'd assumed that was, just part and parcel of Buddhist culture. And I still think that it is, by and large. But there are certain historical, social, cultural influences that have nothing to do with Buddhism, but are perceived as being Buddhist. Like, it's always the case that people who live on an island have very special kinds of perceptions that are not like people who live on a continent. And if you like Sri Lanka, it's always the sense of this is the Buddhist island. We are the owners or the inheritors of the Buddhist Dhamma, and so when you have a majority culture on an island and you have a minority culture from elsewhere, then you have a recipe for trouble. And I don't think that's so. Sometimes these are geographical, cultural, social, all kinds of other things mixed up. It's not. It may be presented as being a religious issue, but that's not necessarily the case. And even in Burma, which is shocking to everyone, then it's hard to say to what extent that is like a Buddhist Muslim a problem, and otherwise it's a matter of people in an area and the sense of everybody wanting different points of land. Sometimes it's over land and influence and so on and so forth. And I'm unsure, so I don't really have to what extent this is primarily a Buddhist thing. But generally, it has to be said that in Buddhist cultures, like Thailand and so on, then the one area in which is a world leader is in birth control. Like the very low birth rate in Buddhist communities, in Thailand, I think in Burma. At the same time, in Muslim communities, there is a policy of having as many children as possible. They feel insecure. They want to increase their numbers. And so this is another social factor in countries where the majority population is more or less stable, and you have a very visibly growing, usually Muslim population, which is very clear that it wants to grow and increase in power. So it brings up all these kinds of emotions and fears, and you see this with immigration in Britain and everywhere. So to what extent, I'm not sure to what extent this is a Buddhist Muslim or a Buddhist this or a Buddhist that, and to what extent it's all kinds of other factors which impinge on people's lives, whatever religious affiliation they have, really play a part. But in media, it's always, it's they want easy labels. They have a very short time in which to tell a story, and so you sort of like Buddhist and Muslim or Christian and Jewish, and you need to simplify things in order to put across a punchy message in a few seconds. And so sometimes it's it's distorting. So I'm not like kind of defender of the Buddhists in Burma, because I don't know what's going on and I find it disturbing. But these are some of the kind of things that I hear.
I'm sorry, Wendy, can I ask one more question? Sorry, I think I didn't phrase the question correctly. I definitely understand that this is not a Buddhist-Muslim matter, like what you said just now is like something related to social, cultural factor. But let me talk about my background. I'm from Malaysia, so it's a Muslim majority country. So what I'm concerned now is the tension, like how they portray this issue as being a religious issue. The tension is being sort of like transmitted to Malaysia. Like you can see clearly your Muslim friends are like bashing and asking like, why is this happening? And so being a Buddhist, I'm a bit like disturbed. I don't know how should I react to that. Yeah.
Well, I think that as Buddhists we don't have to know everything. You know, it's all right to say, I really don't know. You know, even though you're a Buddhist doesn't mean, you know, you have to be a representative of Buddhism and have all the Buddhist answers for non-Buddhist friends or to be able to, and I think we need to, as Buddhists, our thing is to be honest. You know, if you say, yeah, I just don't know. It's really worrying, isn't it? But if you're talking with non-Buddhists and it's like you've got to stick up for Buddhism because you're a Buddhist, then when you do that, it's not very convincing anyway, and I don't think it really works. So what we can say is usually our information about things in other countries is filtered through media, and we don't really have any direct evidence of these things, do we? We know what the media tells us, and the media is not that reliable. So that's about the only thing we can say, that don't condone violence and cruelty and unkindness anywhere under any circumstances. That's all we can say as Buddhists, isn't it? Yeah.